welcome to the November 14th, 2023 Eugene Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. My name's Tiffany Edwards, and I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. And to begin this evening, I would like to call on Commissioner Fragola for the city's land acknowledgement statement.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Alihi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. Therefore, the Planning Commission recognizes that what we do today will affect the many generations who will come after us.
Thank you, Commissioner Fragola. And thanks for everyone joining us in this virtual meeting format. Today at our meeting, we're going to begin deliberations on the River Road Santa Clara adoption package. I want to just go over a few housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that we'll take care of first. So anyone wishing to join the meeting online can do so by following the instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. Planning Commission meetings can also be viewed by watching the live stream available on our website or the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. So we'll begin. I'm going to kick things over to Terry, and she's going to give us a short presentation, then we'll begin our deliberations.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. I'm Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for community planning and design and the project manager for the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan. I'm excited to be back here with you this evening to begin deliberations. As you will recall, we held a public hearing on October 17th jointly with Lane County Planning Commission.
Could you pull your mic closer, please, so we can hear you better?
Absolutely. Is that better? Testing.
Yeah.
Okay. And I do want to pull up the agenda. Yeah, thank you. There we go. So the agenda for this evening will be to talk a little bit about the record following the hearing. Then we'll go into the adoption process, where we are. We'll recap the issues raised at the hearing and then have you begin your deliberations and do a series of straw polls. So first, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission reopen the record until 9 p.m. on November 28th, and that is to respond to new options in the staff report and to emails that have come in. So we have a suggested motion. If one of you would like to make it, we can provide it to you.
Also, we can talk a little bit more about the staff recommendation if Planning Commission has interest. This is a little different than what you have seen in the past with legislative land use code amendments. Typically, Planning Commission will do what you've already done here, which is to set a close of the record for yourselves, not the record as a whole. So all the testimony that comes in will be provided to the decision makers, but typically Planning Commission sets a date after which Planning Commission won't look at the testimony that comes in, so that you have kind of a closed universe of testimony to consider when making your recommendation. You did that here, just as you always do. However, after the close of the Planning Commission record, for the reasons that Terry just talked about, some interested parties have continued to submit testimony, in particular related to some of the options that are proposed in tonight's staff report. And because those options didn't kind of come out for public comment until after the Planning Commission record was closed, if the Planning Commission does not choose to reopen the record, then you won't be able to hear from interested parties about their feelings about those options prior to your recommendation. So given that there's no particular time limit on this process, Planning Commission has the time to reopen the record, and there's clearly interest in communicating with Planning Commission about some of these issues, it's staff's recommendation that Planning Commission in this instance do reopen the record until 9 p.m. on November 28th to give folks some more time to talk to you about their feelings about some of these new options. You're not required to do it, but it seemed to make sense under these circumstances to staff.
So I'm going to ask a question, and then I'll definitely call on you, Commissioner Lear. My question is maybe just a little bit of point of clarification. So I understand that in this process we have a record. As somebody who advocates for a living, I just am kind of wanting some clarification. So because oftentimes if I am advocating to a decision-making body, I can do that right up until a point where a decision is being made. And so I'm just wanting maybe a little bit of clarification as to what might be different about this that constitutes an actual opening of a record to make sure that the lobbying efforts, whatever you want to call it, are placed into an actual record that, you know, is a little bit different from just what I'm used to. And I think I just kind of was interested in getting a bit of clarification.
So Commissioner Edwards, thank you. Let me know if I'm not answering your question, but I think there are a few things going on in the land use arena when it comes to records and ex parte contacts and bias and all of these things. So there, as Planning Commission knows, there are two different types of land use decisions that you are asked to make. One bucket is legislative like this, typically large scale code amendments that affect a number of properties in the city. And then the other bucket are quasi judicial, which we haven't had for a little while. And typically affect only one or a small handful of properties. Actually, that's not true. I'm sorry. Skinner Butte Height Limitation Amendment was quasi-judicial. So in the quasi-judicial context, when you're being asked to act more like a judge, we are concerned about bias. You need to be neutral. We are concerned about ex parte contacts. You need to not be collecting information that is outside the scope of what is provided to the entire commission. And then there's a record, which is all of the material that is placed before and not rejected by the final decision maker. So all of the testimony, all of the evidence, all of the argument that was put in front of you that you had the chance to consider while you're making your decision. In the legislative arena, we don't worry about bias. You're allowed to have preconceived notions about how a legislative decision should turn out. And we don't worry about ex parte contacts. So conversations that you might have with advocates outside of the Planning Commission context, or that might not be available to other planning commissioners, that's okay in a legislative decision. But a legislative decision does still include a record, which is all the material that's placed before and not rejected by the decision maker. In this case, you're making a recommendation, not a final decision, but the decision maker is the Planning Commission as a body. So if more than a quorum of you are provided with the same information, then that information belongs in the record because it was placed before the decision maker. So having conversations is okay. But if information is given to more than a quorum of the Planning Commission, then it needs to be placed in the record by staff, and that will be part of the record that is provided to the final decision makers, in this case, the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners. Okay. So, and because of the way the Eugene Code is written, we have this kind of a construct where planning commission for legislative matters does this sort of soft close of the record, where the record itself remains open. All the information that comes in does still go to the final decision maker, but planning commission kind of sets a deadline that says, beyond this day, we're not going to consider, we, the planning commission, won't consider information that comes in. The final decision maker still will, but that way we have kind of a closed universe of information to consider. So what you did previously was to close the planning commission record, didn't close the record for the final decision maker. That has always remained open and will continue to remain open. What this motion would do would be the planning commission deciding that you want to look at more information that came into the record beyond the previous closing date, which I don't remember.
October 31st.
Thank you, Halloween. And you know, staff will work to let the public know that although the record has always remained open, will continue to remain open, planning commission now has the ability to look at more information. So if there's something that they want to say specifically to planning commission in advance of your recommendation, they now would have until November 28th at 9 p.m. to do that. Does that?
Thank you. Yeah,
That was a very long answer.
no, but you answered exactly what I was looking for, because I well, I'm going to go to Commissioner Lear first, because I think he had something.
I was
and
ready
then-
to make a motion, so if there's
Oh, okay.
I defer to Commissioner Bailey.
Mr. Bailey. Commissioner Bailey.
Question is, after looking at that voluminous last batch, 300 plus pages that was sent to us of testimony, is there a procedure by which issues and questions are responded to by planners, or what is done with that information? And then there were so many other documents included in I assume that's the formal record now, that do we then have to take all those into consideration, the corridor study and all those other things that were added in?
So I'll answer your second question first, and then I'll turn it over to Terry to talk about how staff may respond to testimony that comes in. The material that's in the record is material that has been provided to you, that you have the chance to look at, and that you may use in your determination about whether, in the legislative context, it's a good idea, the proposal is a good idea, and whether it meets the approval criteria in the Eugene Code. You don't have to rely on it all this to the same degree. You know, it's just available to you to read and use as a basis for your planning commission recommendation on this proposal. And then in terms of staff response to testimony that comes in, I'll turn it to Terry.
Sure. I would say that we attempt to respond to all the planning commissioner questions. We attempted to do that in your materials that we put in our memo and summarize for you the themes and major topics that are brought forth in public testimony. So there certainly could be dangling questions in there. But what we tried to do was address the ones that you all either also raised or that we thought would rise to the level of causing you all to want to discuss it or want to make a change. So if there is something that you're curious about, please ask and we can discuss whether there's an answer already in the materials or if we can provide one tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioners have? So Commissioner Lear, I'll go ahead and call on you.
Yeah, in light of the outpouring of information that was received a little bit late in the process, but which still seems like it could be germane to our deliberations, I would move to reopen the record for the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan and Metro Plan amendments, River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Specific Code amendments until 9 p.m. on November 28th. Second.
Second that.
Commissioner Beeson, I believe he beat,
No.
You beat him to the. All right, seconded by Commissioner Beeson. I will call for the vote. Is there any discussion? I can't quite see everybody, so I apologize, you all. I'll go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor of keeping the record open until November 28th? Go ahead and Signal, okay, it looks like we have, it's unanimous, so that passes. All right, thank you all.
Great. All right, we're done with the first item on the agenda. And we'll move
Moving
on.
right along.
Okay. So as we begin, I'd like to remind the commission and those watching what is in the proposed adoption package. This slide we used at your last meeting and at the public hearing, so it should look a little familiar. First up is the actual new proposed River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan. That's the document on the far left. It contains vision statements, goals, and policies. And the purpose of that document is to guide future land use decision-making in the neighborhoods. It would be a whole new plan. The vehicle we use to adopt it is to recommend a Metro Plan amendment, but it is a whole new document. The next one on here is the existing Metro Plan, and there are some proposed amendments to that. Chiefly to remove text that's no longer relevant. So it's a cleanup kind of amendment to the Metro Plan. Third item is a proposed repealing of the 1987 Neighborhood Refinement Plan, which was called the Urban Facilities Plan. And that repealing would go along with the reason staff proposed repealing this document is that we are replacing it with not only the newly created neighborhood plan, but a work in progress called the parcel specific land use diagram and policies, which are anticipated to be complete in 2026. And we'll talk more in just a few slides about whether we have options about keeping both plans in place or different things we could do. The last piece is these neighborhood-specific code amendments, which are proposed for adoption by the city of Eugene only within city limits. And there are options for how these components interact. A number of issues were raised at the public hearing, which we'll go over in just a moment. But for summary on this slide, the Planning Commission's role ultimately is to make a recommendation on what to do with the new neighborhood plan, with the Metro Plan amendments, with the repealing or not of the 1987 plan, and with the adoption of the code amendments. And you have the ability to make changes and recommend different ways to, different solutions for the issues that have been raised. As a side note, or as an additional note, the Lane County Planning Commission's role will be to make recommendations to their decision makers on the first three components. They will not deliberate on the City of Eugene land use code amendments.
Mm.
Okay. We held the hearing on October 17th. We heard from 15 people. Held the record open until October 31st originally. It's now been reopened. And a variety of key issues were expressed in both written testimony and in verbal testimony. Under the topic of general issues and questions, a lot of that was either process-oriented or related to the process products of the process, such as the corridor study that Commissioner Bailey referenced. What was that about? What happened to it? Who did you reach out to? Those kinds of things. And we provided some information for you in your memo about those general issues and questions. The next three are the ones where not only was a lot of testimony brought forward, but commissioners had questions about these three things. And so staff had some discussions internally about, are there different things we could do? How could we be responsive to the testimony? How could we make this a better proposal to meet more people's needs? So tonight we'll attempt to go through discussion and straw polls with the commission on what to do, how to respond to these three issues and any other issues that you want to elevate So you're not limited to just these three. These are just the three that we heard needed to be dealt with. Okay, so diving right in. C2 code amendments. One of the topics that generated a lot of testimony was the proposal to prohibit in the future this list of uses on the screen. The code amendment would prohibit establishing new uses on this list or expanding existing uses. It is important to note that existing uses, like if there's a motorcycle sales shop on River Road already, they can stay. They can, even if you adopted this code amendment or recommended it, they can stay. They can even sell the business and somebody else could operate it. They can continue to operate, but they would not be allowed to expand. Okay. A little bit of background. This came out of the draft special area zone, which was based on the corridor study, workshops, and outreach process, discussions with the community groups involved. And just one other note that prohibited uses are included in other special area zones in the city of Eugene. This is not unique, including the downtown riverfront and Walnut special area zones. And the goal in those areas, similar to the goal of this proposal, to transform the corridor over time to a more neighborhood scale, thriving mixed use corridor with walkable, a walkable district served by frequent transit, biking, and walking. But we heard from some folks, particularly on River Avenue, that this would have a big impact on their business, keep them from expanding, and cause problems in that area. And so staff's proposed solution to that, there are others, but this is the one that we came up with for you all to discuss, is to effectively carve out an area from the code amendments that would create these new prohibited uses. And it's shown in the dotted line on River Avenue. Between River Avenue and Beltline, there are some properties that are still zoned industrial in this area, although all of the properties are in the plan diagram eventually designated commercial. So they would be able to apply for a zone change to commercial anytime. Let's see. Also, we have the wastewater treatment plant on the south side of River Avenue. And I already mentioned that some other places have similar lists of prohibited uses, but staff feels that this is consistent with the overall direction that the project has taken. Discussing a walkable mixed-use corridor with neighborhood serving retail can still be accomplished without including this area, which has a pretty different commercial industrial feel and is located off the corridor. So that is a description of the carve-out option. And for how we thought we would go about the straw poll and discussion is that we would talk through the original proposal. I just talked through the staff recommendation, and then we would see if anybody wanted to put a different proposal on the table. If not, you can discuss the staff recommendation and see if that has support. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I do have a question, but I will gladly scan the room and see if anyone else wants to. Okay, Commissioner Beeson, why don't you go first?
I spent some time looking at special area zone. I think when we've been at this a number of months and kind of thinking about it, processing it. And it occurred to me I had seen prohibitions of use in special area zones. This is not a special area zone.
Correct.
I understand there may be some future plans and so on, but in fact, it's a neighborhood plan. It's essentially with the C2, it's pretty much one road. There are some pockets of C2 out there, I know. My question is there precedent for prohibition of use in neighborhoods? And
Yes.
there is, can you
There-
help me with that? I couldn't
yes.
really find.
Well,
it on the
and
chart.
it's, you may recall from middle housing, there were previously some prohibitions in the neighborhoods surrounding the university area that, there were certain housing types that were not permitted in those neighborhoods. That did change mostly as a result of middle housing, but that is one example that is
Okay.
fresh in my mind. And so we've been talking about this a bunch because people are saying, why aren't you doing a special area zone or an overlay zone? And I think I would just caution people, rather than focusing on the tool, to focus on the outcome. In this particular case, there are a number of tools we could absolutely use to get to certain outcomes. And this is the one, in lieu of doing a special area zone, we went with a simpler approach on this. But
Could I ask another quick
absolutely,
question?
please.
If this goes on through and the council is to approve these prohibited uses as presently proposed, can a business owner who might want to expand, or we've seen a lot of different testimony on this. So let's say someone actually, wanted to go ahead and expand their shop and so on. Is there process and I'm looking for kind of a general answer here. I know the code gets very specific. Is there a process for people to adjust this? Is that adjustment review or get a or change it? Or I'm seeing head shakes and just
No.
don't tell me, is the door just shut once that's passed?
Commissioner Beeson, yes, the door is shut. So the existing businesses that fall within the use categories that are proposed to be prohibited would, as Terry said, be able to continue to operate. They become what's called legal non-conforming uses. So they are allowed to operate kind of as they are within the footprint that they have at the time the code changed. They can change in ownership and management. That's all okay. So the business could be sold, but the legal non-conforming use cannot be expanded or intensified.
Okay.
And it cannot be replaced by a different type of legal non-conforming use. And there are some other pieces, like if legal non-conforming use is discontinued for a year, then they're done and they have to transition to an allowed use.
Okay. Well, I thought all the staff material was very clear. And I was just sort of wondering if there was any recourse at all. So that answers that. Thank you. Thanks.
I'm going to jump in and ask a question, but if anybody else, okay, Commissioner Ramey, let me go ahead. I'll call on you next. But I want to kind of tack onto that. I have a couple of questions related to that. I am curious, and maybe Terry or anyone else who's involved in the process, I'm actually curious in looking at this list of business types and the prohibited uses, what they were aiming for. What puts them all in that category? That because I can think of lots of types of businesses that would not create an inclusive walkable neighborhood. For example, a big Target or a grocery store or something like that, right? You have a big parking lot, but I'm just kind of curious, what about these types of businesses did the neighborhood process decide that they didn't want anymore? But
yeah,
sorry, that sounds like a harsh question.
It's a good question. And I think it was a combination of factors, and the plan itself is a set of vision statements, goals, and policies. This is a specific code amendment that tries to implement some of that upstream goals, vision, and policy language. There were examples in other parts of the city. There were use lists in other special area zones. There was input taken at public workshops, but it was very iterative. It wasn't like, let's go through the table and pick which ones we like and don't like.
Right.
It was more like which ones have had precedent in the code for being excluded from areas that we're trying to transform into more of a neighborhood scale walkable corridor. So,
Okay. Yeah. My next question is, have we identified all of the businesses that are in these categories that would be impacted? I know that we heard from the folks on River Avenue, but who else hasn't been paying attention, hasn't been part of the process that we may be overlooking even if we did decide to kind of slightly change course and carve out River Avenue or something? What?
Yeah.
Do we know?
Question.
I don't. Okay.
We don't have a comprehensive business inventory at the city of Eugene, but we attempted to provide multiple opportunities through mailers, walking the business corridor area at least twice through the course of the work, and general opportunities once there was a code amendment proposed to learn more about that opportunity. So in June, we sent a letter to all property owners and businesses that would be affected by this C2 code amendment, and invited them to an online information session to learn about that. It was presented at a couple neighborhood organization meetings and a general meeting at North Eugene High School. So opportunity,
yeah.
But yeah, hard.
So it's possible the city could hear from businesses that didn't know. If that is the case, I'm curious from Lauren's perspective, is there a liability that the city would have to compensate any businesses who were zoned out of being able to expand, or even, I mean, I've heard from businesses that would really impede their ability even to resell their business at some point, just because the future owner could be impeded from, any kind of expansion or whatnot. And I'm curious, does that put the city at any kind of risk of a lawsuit or anything else like that?
Because of lack of notice specifically?
No, just because it is impacted their livelihood in some way. Could they make a claim that the sale of my business suffered because it's no longer a legal, it's a non-conforming legal use? Yes.
So unlike for example, Measure 47 claim, which is specific to residential uses, these are commercial uses. And so there isn't that same sort of overarching statutory requirement for additional notice or possible compensation. There isn't, as far as I'm aware, an avenue for a claim against the city in the same way that a Measure 47, 49, whichever measure it is, claim could be filed. And, this cities and other local governments make changes to their land use codes all the time, and those changes impact uses, including businesses. That those are policy choices that the policymakers could make. But that's not to say there won't be impacts. I'm sure there will. I'm not aware, like I said, of anything that is similar to a Measure 49 that applies in the commercial space.
Okay, one quick last one. Were any of these businesses brought into fruition, or they were established at a time where it was something beyond, aside from C2? For example, like an industrial zoning or something else like that, to where they've had the zoning changed multiple times?
Oh,
do we know?
That's certainly possible. The area has been, River Ave specifically has been designated for commercial for a while, since the 87 plan, at least, I believe.
I think my recollection in the record is that there's at least one business that had been established when it was an industrial zone. It was then commercially redesignated, and so I just was curious if that had been the case, because if that entire area at one point was all an industrial area and you had all these businesses in the 60s or whenever that had been established, and then over time just kind of trying to establish some sort of understanding of the history. So I will stop with my questions at this point, and I'm going to call on Commissioner Ramey.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. you asked the one question that I was wondering about, which was, are there any other potential carve-out zones that, or uses or property owners that we should be worried about? And it sounds like we don't know, but there might be. And I guess that's just what it is. My second is a question for staff. Rather than doing a carve out, and you mentioned this, Terry, a couple times, we're trying to focus on the corridor itself. And if you define the corridor as the street, obviously, and some measurement on either side of the street, and we applied these, we only applied the cannot do these uses in that area, that seems like it's more consistent with the plan altogether, that we're not trying to capture all the C2 zones. We're just trying to capture the C2 zone that is adjacent to the corridor. Did you talk about that as an idea?
Yes, we have, and the corridor study did start that way with a defined area within a quarter-mile walking distance all the way up to the new transit station. There was a discussion about when we shifted away from the special area zone and started looking at amendments to the C2 zone. And even before that, when we were still working on the special area zone, there was a discussion with the CAC and their related groups about outlying C2 zones because there is a land use pattern out there in River Road and Santa Clara where neighborhood retail land, C1 and C2, has been built with things that aren't neighborhood retail, such as commercial storage units. A whole commercial area on Irvington, I believe, is taken up by a commercial storage and not neighborhood serving commercial. And so the desire was to try to create a regulatory framework for businesses that serve neighborhood daily needs to survive. So it was discussed, and it's certainly an option. You could go back to that thinking to apply it just within a walking distance of the corridor. But there was a desire, at least from some, to apply it to the outlying C2. Although not specifically River Avenue. I personally, as a staff person, I feel like that area is different enough to warrant a carve out, and that's why we recommended that. But there are other solutions that could work.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have their hand up?
I have another question.
Oh, and Commissioner Lear had his hand up too.
So you mentioned that the city doesn't have an inventory of businesses, and it's always easy to say something in hindsight and with the benefit of retrospect, but would it benefit the process to understand businesses that are going to potentially be affected by this? Would that potentially change the outreach or the direction of staff's work if, that information was reviewed in advance?
I would answer that partly by saying the fact that we don't have an inventory, I was just making a statement that we don't track businesses. We don't have a business license program at the city of Eugene. So we could do an inventory and then a new business moves in and we don't know about it because we don't track it. I do think there's interest in doing that. And the other part I would say is, yes, I do think that there was an attempt to understand the businesses that exist and what their concerns are, and that fed into the process as a whole. But we could always collect more and better information.
And then I had a little bit of a follow-up, which was, is there a more appropriate zone than C2 that just focuses on, neighborhood retail? Or if not, should there be, if that's going to be a really major objective in neighborhood plans in the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. It makes me think of our upcoming citywide work. So where we will be looking at what's the appropriate tool, zoning, and perhaps incentive programs. We don't know all the tools yet for all of the corridors or corridors that have similar conditions. So like River Road is commercial and residential largely, but West 11th is more commercial industrial. and as is Highway 99. So as we start getting into that citywide work, I think we will be looking at what's the right tool, what do we need at this point going forward to meet what we want to do in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. I go back to questioning the prohibited uses and the categorization of those. One testimony I read pointed out accurately that at the intersection of River Avenue and River Road, all of the commercial enterprises there are big corporate chain in the enterprises, you know. It's not exactly localized. Whereas on River Avenue, a lot of these business owners are just little local family-owned, group-owned, locally owned businesses, which I would think we'd want to promote. Even if someone way up River Road in the Santa Clara area wanted to provide motorcycle service or something of that sort. So I'm still stuck at what the motivation was behind this and what it serves.
I'll try to summarize maybe a different way. First, our code doesn't distinguish between local ownership and out of town ownership.
Obviously.
So it's about the use, not the ownership. I was trying to think in my mind, I was trying to visualize River Avenue and River Road and whether any of these uses are on that corner. I don't think they are.
They are not.
Yeah. But again, the thought was to try to transition the character of the corridor over time away from auto-oriented uses and more towards neighborhood serving. Okay. Yeah, and there's overlap with the coming work for climate-friendly and equitable communities work.
Yes.
We're not too far down that road. We've accomplished the parking reform element of that. Just this past Monday night, council adopted that change. And the next thing coming up for planning will be climate-friendly areas. And there's a lot of overlap in the kinds of uses and development standards that are in the same vein of thinking in this plan.
I had one question oh, sorry. Wait, somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you guys go and then remind me. I'm going to come back to my question. Commissioner Fragala, were you first? Or sorry, you guys know who's
to the
first?
left is the first.
Okay, Commissioner Isaacson and then Commissioner Fragala.
Well,
then...
thank you, Chair. I will say it's nice to not be in that hot seat looking over my shoulder trying to figure out who has raised their hand first. Okay. So that's a nice change in the environment. I have a question for staff. When we said that it's essentially closed the door on if we adopt the proposal here, could not a zone change proposal be offered and a future planning commission vote on that change like we did for Cintas, or is that excluded by having the use aspect included?
So Commissioner Isaacson, let me know if I misunderstood your question, but I think there's sort of two different things. There are use lists, allowed uses for each of the city's adopted zones. So the C2 community commercial zone has a whole lot of uses that are available in that zone. What the proposal would do would be to take away the availability of some of those uses for new, they couldn't be newly created, I suppose, in C2 zoned areas near the River Road Santa Clara corridor. A property owner could apply to rezone their property consistent with their Metro Plan designation, and that might allow them to take advantage of a different list of uses. But I don't know, and maybe Terry can speak to this, whether any property owners who are currently zoned C2 could rezone in a way that would allow them to do any
industrial. I'm not sure.
Or different commercial zone. I don't think those. Proposal. It's not exactly what happened with Cintas, but if a property rezones, then they would be looking at the allowed uses for that new zone. And I can't speak to, what all the allowed uses for all of the zones are.
Sure, I get that. I guess what I'm saying is when I hear close the book or closed, this is closed-ish, right? So if somebody were to ask for a rezoning and get it, and their proposed use was allowed under the new zone for which they're applying, they would be allowed to do that.
That's correct. That's a correct statement. Yeah.
Right. So, my concern is that I know how much Cintas paid to get theirs rezoned, and it was not cheap. And so my concern is that Quick Lube, which we mentioned, there's nothing on the corner that would violate. That's Quick Lube's on the corner, and Quick Lube is would be a prohibited business. So let's say Quick Lube decides, our business is doing very well.
It would not be a prohibited use, just for clarification.
It's a motor vehicle sales rental service. So isn't it a service for motor vehicles?
There's actually a specific call out, Elena, not right, or well, they are categorized under the definition of a service station use, so they are not a prohibited use.
Okay.
Different conversation.
Yeah. Well,
Jiffy Lube is not a service station.
okay.
So I guess my point is that if there was a business that had that kind of money and resources to be able to go down that road, as opposed to the mom and pop who necessarily doesn't, now we've created an environment where there's a means test to be able to expand your business versus the appropriate use for the neighborhood, and that's a rub that I have in this process.
Commissioner Isaacson, I understand your concern because there is a process that somebody could change their Metro Plan their Metro Plan designation. I, however, am struggling to figure out what zone they would actually go to that's more flexible than C2 is. It is the most flexible zone we have. This would eliminate that handful of uses, but I don't know what other zone they would go to that would allow them more flexibility, and that we would, Cintas was in an industrial area, went to a different industrial zone, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. So I'm struggling to think about which one they would actually go to in this situation. But you're right, there is a process that they could ask for another plan designation and zoning.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Fragola.
Yes, thank you. So I kind of wanted to take a step back from some of the, very detailed questions that people are asking and bring us back to the fact that we're talking about a neighborhood plan, which is a vision for a neighborhood. It's a vision that was worked on quite intensively by a community in Eugene about how they'd like to see their neighborhood evolve. And when I first joined the Planning Commission, I was the liaison to the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan, which, that was, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. That feels like a long time. This effort has been continuing for decades. Even in the short time that I was the liaison, and my opportunity to attend community events, it was quite breathtaking, the level of community engagement that happened around this plan. I mean, we're talking about events at North Eugene High School that were hundreds of people, or, draft code work that 40, 50, 60 people would show up for. This was a very engaged community process. I think in our memorandum, we hear thousands of hours of work. I think hundreds of thousands of hours of volunteer work went into the vision for this community. So these people are presenting a neighborhood plan for a vision for the type of community that they are hoping to see evolve. And much of what they're presenting is in alignment with many of the other values that are represented in the Metro Plan and that are represented in in CFIC, in climate friendly, equitable communities. And so I'm hoping that as the Planning Commission thinks about this process, they can think about the type of community that people who live there are thinking about. And they want walkable communities with services that meet the needs of the people living there. And one of the things that I heard expressed throughout the process, and I think Terry gave a very good example of it tonight, is on Irvington, where a C2 property, which could have been some type of commercial services to the neighborhood, became storage units. And yes, storage units are necessary, but there are a lot of C2 properties in the River Road area that have already gone to these types of potentially prohibited uses on the list. And one of the reasons that the neighbors and the community thought about this list was they felt like there were already plenty of examples of these activities in the corridor. They would like to see other types of commercial activity encouraged. And this was one way to get at that. So I think it's really important that we're asking these questions that dive down into the nitty-gritty details of what if. But I also would like to encourage fellow commissioners to think about the work that's been done by the neighborhood and the community in this area, and that we're thinking about a neighborhood plan that is to be adopted to create a vision and a future, and hopefully the development of a community that will promote sustainable, walkable, climate-friendly communities. I'm in support of the carve-out option. I think that that River Avenue area is distinct, but I also am in support of the original recommendation to prohibit these uses based on the neighborhood plan as a vision for this community.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Fragola. Anybody else have anything real quick? I just want to respond briefly to that statement, because I actually also, when I first started on the Planning Commission, the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan was, I think, probably one of the first presentations that I had in 2017. And so I know how much time and effort has been gone into this process. And I absolutely recognize that. But also, I think that hundreds of thousands of hours have gone into people's livelihoods building businesses over decades. And so while I'm inclined to support the carve out, I also think that in general, I think I would be more comfortable supporting something that does not impact the existing businesses. I have no issue with no future existence or establishment of these types of businesses gets to come to this area. But for those who exist currently and who have been there since long before this process started, and that are also to be recognized as neighbors, I think I kind of want to be a voice for them, because I do think that it's important that we recognize that businesses, especially locally owned businesses in our community, are hard to come by. And I don't want to send the message personally, and I'm not going to speak for the commission, but I don't want to send the message personally that, that there are certain types of businesses that we just don't want in our neighborhood, kind of thing. And so for me, that's just me personally, and I just want to express that. I am comfortable with something that doesn't impact these businesses. And I want to hear from you all. Commissioner Beeson.
Yeah, I'd also like to respond to Commissioner Fragolet and briefly. I agree about the plan. I'm actually ready to support the plan, gone through it in detail and kind of watched as it's unfolded over the years I've been here. I guess I share a lot of what Commissioner Edwards just said. This particular code amendment coming out of the fullness of that plan, to me, it doesn't feel like it's quite ready yet for really full consideration. I appreciate the idea that we need to step back and consider what the neighbors are trying to do out there. And I really am wanting to do that. I think the fact that there are so many detailed, I'm not even, there's a lot of questions in my mind about this. And the fact that there are a lot of questions, I think speaks to kind of some uncertainty about whether we really ought to be doing something like this. So anyway, I'm of a mind at this point that we really shouldn't even be doing the amendment. I guess if we get to the point of considering the carve out, I'll take a look at that. But I'm concerned that this really isn't really ready to be approved.
Can I ask, I'm going to ask a question, a clarifying question. The plan that's before us for adoption is a separate action than these specific code revisions.
Correct.
Okay. So I want to make that clarification. Then one other question, Terry, because I know that in this process where we started with the River Road Santa Clara plan, and we kind of went through an evolutionary process where we decided, or the collective consensus of the effort decided that there were some code amendments that they had originally wanted to consider, that they thought, you know what, let's put this into 2026. And so I guess I'm curious about where this could live, and if some of these specific code amendments could actually be incorporated into that work in 2026 without compromising the adoption of the neighborhood plan. But to be able to say, why don't we look at all of this collectively together as part of that iterative process? And maybe I'm incorrect, so no, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I understand your question. There are separate actions and separate tools.
Okay.
So the neighborhood plan itself could be adopted and would be adopted as a separate action from the adoption of the code amendment. And so through your deliberations, you can decide what you want to recommend to council, and then they would adopt whatever they choose to adopt.
Okay.
Because this would prohibit these uses from C2 everywhere.
No, it's in the boundaries of River Road and Santa Clara.
Okay.
Specifically in that area of town. So,
okay.
Right.
Say that specifically on that slide.
Commissioner Ramey.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Ramey, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. So I'm listening to these arguments, and it's pretty interesting to me that what we're being asked to do is make one neighborhood free of a certain kind of use, which begs the question of, well, what about all the other neighborhoods? Because if we follow the climate-friendly direction and other initiatives in the city, as were outlined earlier today, we're pretty much going to eliminate all of these uses everywhere. And I don't know that that's particularly a realistic approach to things. So I'm a little troubled by that. And we don't really have tools in front of us or the ability to say as a community, oh, no, it's just some of these areas where we're not going to have these uses, that there's plenty of room for them in other parts of the city, that they serve the metro area. And so we don't want them, it's like our old theory of dispersing housing. You know, we don't want all that housing in one area. We want them all over the place. Right. Because we're not just going to have one area be the dumping grounds for that kind of use. So I'm a little troubled by that. It's almost like we got here first, so we get to ban them first in our neighborhood. But on the other hand, I have to think that with a metropolitan area the size that we are, it really is an opportunity to begin to fine-tune different areas for different specialties. And we have to trust that in the end, we won't have created a situation where we're all driving to Corvallis to get our oil changed or something like that, which really I don't think is what we want to be doing. So I will be in favor of the carve out. It's not an elegant solution, but I think it honors the process we've been through to date, and I will eagerly await how this goes with the rest of the community and what sort of uses we allow where.
Commissioner Lear.
I also think the carve out seems like a really nimble solution, and praise to you all for taking and processing all of that information so quickly and coming up with something that can hopefully kind of not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay. Bailey.
I'm in favor of the carve out also, and happily not yet address prohibited uses. The carve out is a good option.
Okay, so do we all want to try to take a straw poll for the various options? Okay, so I hear the carve out as an option. I hear no proposed as an option. I hear what I had said was considering this as part of the 2026 code amendments. Go ahead.
If it helps briefly, I will go. I've registered my discomfort, and I think I would go with the carve out.
Okay.
If that simplifies the straw polling.
Then let's do this. Let's take a poll as to who and the commissioner, who of the commissioners who is in favor of the carve out, the River Avenue carve out. Go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Almost unanimous. Six.
Thank you. So Tiffany, you're the one who didn't support that.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
We did one of them.
We did one of them. One for one.
No, this is really helpful because we're obviously not done after this discussion. We have more work to do to actually make the carve out a thing and to bring it back to you as an actual piece of code language. So thank you for that. We'll take your direction and all of the comments that were said and bring it back to you.
And I'd also just throw out there that now that Planning Commission has reopened the record, there's an opportunity for interested parties to communicate to you their thoughts and feelings about the carve-out option.
Absolutely.
So you should have more information from the public before your next deliberations as well.
Yeah. Okay. Any guesses for if this one will be a longer discussion or a shorter discussion?
This one will be even more fun.
Yeah. So the next one is building height. The current proposal or the original proposal was to reduce the maximum height of buildings in the C2 zone throughout the two neighborhoods from 120 feet to 60 feet. That was based on the work done for the corridor study and looking at similar special area zones and special area plans around town, such as Walnut. There are others too. The Chase Nodal Development Area limits buildings to 50 feet. Downtown Riverfront has a variety of different height standards. So there are examples for this being done differently in different parts of the city. Also, part of the current proposal is that in the existing code standard that says within 50 feet of the R1 zone, the maximum height of buildings, it will be the same as the adjacent residential zone. So in R1, that's 30 feet. So within 50 feet of that R1 zone, C2 buildings can only be 30 feet tall. And that is proposed to remain under all proposals. There's also a new state law that grants affordable housing projects height exemptions. And we can provide more detail about that. It came up at one of your previous meetings. But for those who do get concerned about housing capacity, if you're an affordable aimed at a certain area median income percentage project, you are by state law granted additional building height. Okay, so the options, after hearing testimony about this and questions from several commissioners, we created some options for you. One of them is just to show you what existing and very recently constructed buildings look like in the C2 zone that are 120 feet. These two are both on Franklin Boulevard. 959 Franklin is 123 feet and 515 Franklin is 120. Both are in the C2 zone, really close to downtown and the U of O campus. Then over in the Walnut Station area, where we have a variety of height limits in the Walnut Special Area Zone, we have two buildings that are both 65, which is the maximum height in this area. The Yugo Courtside on the left and the Yugo Skybox on the right. They're both 5-story buildings with first floor, ground floor commercial, and 4 floors of housing. Then the one we showed you previously would fit within that 65-foot limit, but is a few feet shorter, 62 feet, the Amazon corner, also zone C2, 5 stories, ground floor commercial, and 4 floors of housing. So given all of that and the discussions that we have had, the staff options are to stay with the original proposal or increase it slightly to 65. And that's the one we're recommending based on your previous discussions and some of the testimonies submitted. But similar to the previous item, there are lots of different ways this could go. So we welcome your discussion and ideas for how to move forward.
Okay. I will start a queue. I want to jump in it. Commissioner Isaacson, go ahead and kick us off.
Well, I just had a question about the record being open. I just want to make sure that, well, obviously there's been a 2-week gap between where we are now and when we closed it. We'll retroactively get items that were submitted before today, but after October 31st, in addition to things going forward until the new date closed, correct?
Correct.
Good. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Fragala, why don't you go ahead and then I'll jump in.
Thank you. So I really appreciate that you brought back the am I saying the name right? The study that was done, the economic study and evaluation. Is
the
it
Rowell Brokaw memo?
Brokaw? Okay, Rowell Brokaw, thank you. I found that to be really helpful, and because I know that so much work went into that corridor study, that was really beneficial information. One thing that I did notice in there that is on the diagrams is that it looks like sometimes there are height bonuses. For example, on the 75-foot maximum building heights section, it says, and I think it may even say this on the previous one. It says it on all of them. 55 feet maximum, including 5-foot ground floor height bonus, and 10-foot small lot or affordable housing bonus. So you just mentioned that affordable housing won't have any height restrictions. But how would that 5-foot ground floor height bonus work? I assume it's to encourage commercial spaces on the ground floor.
I have to apologize, Commissioner Fragala. The memo you're referring to was attached to your packet. It was the Rowell Brokaw evaluation of the previous version of the special area zone.
Right.
So that is no longer on the table. The 5-foot additional.
Right. I understand. Yeah, I understand that it's not part of what we're discussing, meaning that there is no special area zone on the table, but we did talk about incentives last time, and so I am curious how that incentive would have worked as a frame of reference for how we might incentivize something.
If I can recall, I believe the idea was if a building was proposed with additional ground floor height, then the code would include a trigger that would allow the building to be that much taller. So it's a regulatory incentive, I guess, built into the code.
Okay, so in other words, we can create incentives that would potentially provide additional footage in some spaces as part of the code. I'm not suggesting that we implement a special area zone as described here. I'm just trying to think about some of the conversations that we had regarding incentives last time for encouraging commercial uses on the ground floor.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to jump in with a question. Terry, you showed us 2 buildings that are 120 feet. Any ballpark as to how many in our community exist that are that high?
No, I'd have to go back and look. There are a handful.
Less than.
And are
10,
and I would
Kelly Whitmell says 6 to 10.
And,
okay.
Right.
And probably mostly
Downtown,
along Franklin and downtown.
Yeah,
okay.
downtown.
I'm wondering because my understanding is that the current code or the current zone of C2 across the community, with the exception of any of the special area zones, is already 120 feet. But yet we don't see that development at all, other than in those areas where it's justified, I suppose. Okay. The other thing I just kind of want to point out, because I'm kind of struggling with this complete, like cutting it in half, literally going from 120 down to 60. I understand the justification for 65, but I also kind of want to acknowledge that when this process started in 2017, I don't think we were at the same place we are now with regards to our housing crisis. And I do have some concerns as to how long this plan is going to live, and we will be limited in this, you know, rather than kind of let development organically happen over time as it does everywhere else. So I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about this one right now. As a housing advocate, I struggle with just eliminating any kind of opportunity or potential. But I also look at those 65-foot buildings and think that seems very appropriate. I just don't know what our future would look like, and what, you know, this is where I'm kind of struggling. So I'm just going to put that out there. Okay, Commissioner Beeson, then Commissioner Lear.
Well, I guess I want to tag on to that a bit. I've talked about this a couple of times, so I'm going to try to be brief. I really, on this one, I do think we should leave the existing code in place. My logic on this, I think kind of from the beginning has been, there's kind of 2 parts to it to me that sort of go hand in hand. One is we have capacity and capability in the community with 120 feet to go to build some buildings, maybe 7 stories, maybe 6, maybe 8 stories, that would tend to be multi-use and would have housing. And that was kind of pointed out in the Brokaw memo to a degree. Yeah. I'm not feeling like as a community we should just give that up. I think it's a pretty remote possibility out there that anybody'd come along and want to build all buildings. There might be in the next 5 or 30 years, there might be 2 or 3 7 or 8 story buildings. I'm kind of guessing, I don't know. But I think we shouldn't, to go clear down to 60 or 65 feet kind of precludes the possibility in the future, depending on changed construction methods, material methods, financing methods, we could be precluding housing that we need in our community. Now, I said it goes hand in hand. The flip side for me, which I think is I've tried to think through as carefully as I can. I don't see that there are a lot of parties that would be adversely impacted if there were a couple of buildings out there that were taller than 65 feet. The C2 zoning is pretty limited. It tends to be right along a zone, an area that we call an urban transit zone. It's exactly where we want density, and it's where we want housing. The biggest thing I'm struggling with personally is, I guess, as people listen to this, that who have a strong feeling that they don't like tall buildings, or they don't want however it was kind of characterized in the memo, they don't like the maximum height along the river road. I'm thinking it would be good, and I'm glad the record is still open. I would sort of ask, and particularly from the neighborhood councils and some of the groups, I would like to hear some more specifics about why 60 feet, why 65 feet, and I think that would help. So I've just been kind of for a while, Adam, in a place where I don't see a lot. I think we should leave the code alone. I don't think we should preclude that opportunity for additional housing in our community. And anyway, just kind of where I am. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner Beeson. Commissioner Lear.
I think I'm in agreement with Commissioners Edwards and Beeson in being concerned about limiting height for this neighborhood in this zone. Of course, it's easy to understand as a neighbor and a person who lives in the community why you wouldn't want big buildings around. But those 120-foot buildings have 300 plus units in each of them. There were hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into the community. And more units means more housing, which means more competition for renters, which means lower rents and more options. And it's something we've seen in this community over the past 4 to 6 months as rents have actually begun to drop, with a lot of new developments, especially multifamily, coming online. And it's a very immediate one-to-one reaction. More units means cheaper rents. I think large multifamily buildings like this also drive the type of walkable, accessible commercial retail that has been hoisted as the most important thing for community members. And this is a way to get them, because if you can actually build a building like this, which very few organizations can afford to or have the wherewithal to do, of course, all of those folks are going to need coffee shops and restaurants and places to go and walk to. And I think that really supports the goal of walkable commercial retail opportunities in a neighborhood.
Okay. Anybody with their hands up behind me that I can't see? Anyone else want to offer up some thoughts on different options or different, so far I've heard we obviously have a staff recommendation to increase to 65 feet for a height limit. I'm curious about the transition standards, if that's kind of a component of it. My personal, whether that's part of the building height or that's a separate straw poll item, I would say for me personally, I'd be supportive of having those in place at the 120-foot level, but if we're dropping down the heights, I don't see why. I mean, I just don't think, I'm having a hard time justifying why we would need to then, do both. And I do think I kind of along the lines with Commissioner Beeson, what he said, this notion that people are feeling that they need to be protected from development. And I think that's something that our community, there's this narrative out there, and I don't think it's always as productive as it could be, but to your point, I would love to hear from folks, like what do they feel they need that protection from, that 65 feet versus 120 is, especially if they don't actually live next to it, I guess would be my question. Like who are we protecting from a 120-foot building, and what does that mean? So Terry,
just a quick response to one
Yeah.
of your items, because the transition zone that would have applied in the special area zone between taller buildings on the corridor down to R1 wasn't necessary when we opted to keep that within 50 feet. The building height is limited to same as R1.
Okay.
So that's still on the table. So if you were to go and recommend keeping 120, you would still have that within 50 feet. It's a lower as the main transition standard in building heights. There are others that are still part of the code amendment package that frankly there wasn't a lot of testimony on or questions about, and so we didn't raise them up for a straw poll.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Do we have a diagram or a map that shows the River Road area that is impacted by this, where these lots are, or how many, or can you point me to it?
There's something in our memo here, but it's
Yeah, I was
more of
thinking
a,
it was in,
actually it's in the plan document. Let me see, I'm gonna pull it up.
Yeah, I mean, the main
Probably isn't helpful.
map would be the zoning map.
Yeah.
So all C2 properties would be affected by these code amendments. Other maps that we could provide might include where that properties within 50 feet fall. That might be one that would be good information to for folks to see.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think what other maps.
I mean, I don't know if you can open it.
I can't while I'm sharing my screen.
Okay.
The zoning map.
just pulled up the zoning.
Yeah, the zoning map would probably be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Fragala and then Commissioner Ramey.
I believe Commissioner Ramey hasn't had a first go yet, and I have, so I'll defer to him first.
Okay, Commissioner Ramey.
Well, thank you. You're so gracious. The issue of height, there really is a difference if you're standing on a sidewalk next to a 120-foot high building and a 65-foot high building. There's a difference when you're across the street then on the other curb, because then depending on which way you're oriented, it's probably blocking the sun. So if you want a walkable community, having a smaller scale building is definitely better. I don't think anybody can say from an experiential point on the street that you're better off with a taller building over a shorter building, although I'm sure there are people out there that would say that. But for me, it's just sort of a common sense thing. Yes, that would be better. You have more access to sun. You have less sort of weird urban wind that comes through around those tall buildings. So it just seems like that's a better thing from the built environment's point of view. What we don't know is whether or not that extra 60 feet, those 5 floors, is going to be crippling to our desire to add to housing stock or future growth, whatever it is. We just don't know that. We know that corridor design, urban planning, transit corridors, and other places, 65 to 75 feet, that's pretty much the standard. They're successful. They create walkable communities. But you just can't tell looking in the future whether we've hamstrung ourselves with housing capacity or not. So at the end of the day, I think for me, I would much prefer a walkable environment to one that is perhaps not as walkable. And I'm comfortable that there is capacity within the urban area to take up what we may be losing in this area. I know that the Walnut Station is a corridor, and it is, I believe, 75 is the highest you can go there, but it could be 65. I'm not sure, Terry, which it is. But there's an example of a residential area that's commercial mixed use that came to this same conclusion, that we need to go down from 120 to 75 or 60, whatever and the reasons for that were, well, how wide are the streets? How do street trees grow? How much air and light do you get when you're on the sidewalk? What is the environment for the pedestrian in that environment? And so I think that for me, I'm going to just go with the 65. I think that's perfectly acceptable. And when we have a straw poll, that's what I will vote for. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. All right, now Commissioner Fragala.
Thank you. So I also wanted to say that I'm in support of the 65 foot limit, and for many of the same reasons that Commissioner Ramey just said. I think there's a lot of planning information, including all of the work that was done in the corridor study and in looking at friendly walkable neighborhoods, that indicate that this range between 60 to 75 is a good target, and we have good examples of that. I'd also like to point out that we have heard reasons why neighbors in this area are so concerned, and it didn't have to do with I don't like tall buildings. It had to do with many of the C2 properties that are available are quite close to the river. And there's a very unique component to this neighborhood in that River Road runs parallel to the Willamette River. And some of the properties are very, very close to the Willamette River. And so there's been kind of this running thread through the neighborhood plan and then the corridor plan, which was eliminated, for now. And then, the special area zone, which is no longer on the table, into the draft, into the code for the Willamette Greenway, the clear and objective code for the Willamette Greenway, where there's been kind of this balancing and negotiation in the process of, how do we honor the process that's happened and how it's changed, and also think about this neighborhood, which is very close to the river. And I do think that there is a unique characteristic here, that is about creating an urban environment that is welcoming to taller buildings. I mean, 65 feet is a taller building. It's not 120 feet, but and all of the things that planners have demonstrated make a good walkable, livable community. So I do think there are some unique characteristics here to be considered. And again, the entire ongoing process, which has evolved so frequently. And so I'm in support of the staff's recommendation for the 65 feet. And I'd also like to ask, because the code package is separate from the neighborhood plan, I'm assuming that at some point in the future, the code package could also be revised if the city were recognizing that citywide they needed to address these types of neighborhood limitations. Would that be correct?
Sure. Through a future code amendment process, it could be revisited.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Go for it.
If this proposal is also just for that River Road area, not citywide, I'm looking at the zone map and it appears to me there are very, very few parcels that are C2, and I don't see a whole lot of them adjacent to the river, except on the Cal Young side, and almost none up in Santa Clara. So it almost seems unnecessary to change the height. You've got it mostly focused around the Beltline and River Road, River Avenue already. That's the biggest concentration of C2. And then some over in Cal Young.
So I'm going to chime in with my epiphany here as I'm reflecting on what Commissioner Bailing is saying, as well as everybody else. I do want to recognize all of the thought and all of the work that's gone into this neighborhood plan, because I do think that just getting all of those people together for 6 years and coming up with a vision and something that there's a lot of value and tremendous amount of work. So kudos to everybody who's involved in that. To your point, there's not a lot of C2 properties as it is. And so in my opinion, none of them are currently developed to the degree of even anything. I mean, I think they're probably all single story or even, parking lot mostly. So I guess I'm looking at it as feeling comfortable with a 65-foot height limit for those very limited amount of properties throughout our community. I mean, I do definitely vacillate back and forth, because I think if there was some sort of standard citywide that we said, sorry, anything zoned for commercial and for housing needs to be maximized. I think if there's a process to adopt something different citywide, I could support that. But I think I could get there with the staff recommendation of the 65 feet. But certainly would love to hear from people if they're listening that make your case, because so Commissioner Beeson.
One last quick comment. I'm not wanting to leave here being known as the 120 foot.
I couldn't hear you, Ken.
I'm not wanting to leave here being the 120 foot building person. I don't want to be too repetitive, but I'm continue to be in favor of just leaving the code the way it is. And I'm really seeing that as just leaving in place some flexibility for the future for things that we really don't know whether they'll happen. And maybe along the way, there'll be a few 6 or 7 story buildings might appear. And that capability is there in our community to provide what is, there are a lot of benefits to construction of something like this, as Commissioner Lear was getting to. So I just want to make that, that's really, I guess, you know, I don't know if there's a option that we can talk about 85 or 90 foot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling a little bit with just cutting the whole thing in half. And so
yeah,
I'll stop there, but thank you.
Okay. Do I have any hands behind me?
We haven't heard from Dan about this one.
He's been very quiet tonight. Commissioner Isaacson, do you want to chime in at all? Before
I'm
take
not chairing the meeting, so you know, my general feeling is, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but we just had a height change for the Gordon Hotel in that area, right? So theoretically, whatever decision we came about, if in the future a development project came about that someone felt that a height limit beyond what we're coming up with was appropriate for the neighborhood, they could come to the city and ask for a change.
With a lot of effort and time and resources.
Right.
That's a code amendment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a code amendment.
Right. So I think that part of the problem in having these conversations that we've had at the neighborhood level is this is not something that's going to happen overnight. Nothing we're going to make a decision today and next week there's going to be breaking ground on a 120 foot or 100 or even a 65 foot building. This is 20 years in advance. This is 30 years from now. So I'm comfortable with the idea that that's going to take time to get to that level. It would completely stand out of character, and there's no development that would come and put even a 65 foot building in the next year, 2 years, 10 years on River Road. It just would be completely uncharacteristic of the neighborhood. The neighborhood's going to have to develop to where that would seamlessly be fit in. You know, Franklin Boulevard has the development that it has because over the past 30 years, it's moved in that direction to warrant that kind of development, both from a height limit, but also the cost of building it. So my feeling is that we don't necessarily have to go and leave it the way it is and allow for 120 feet. If 120 feet is in the future of a road, River Road, that will naturally happen on its own, either organically through a change over time, or someone's going to come to the table and say, we've got 9 60-footers and it's time, based on population and everything else, to take it to that next level. And here's our plan. And this is how we're going to fund it. And that will allow the neighborhood to then weigh in on what that would look like, whether it would fits with the neighborhood at that time. So I'm fine with the 65 foot.
All right. So I'm going to just do a quick straw poll and just remind everybody that this is not a vote. This is just kind of a temperature taking, because we just kind of want to see where folks are at, just so staff can kind of come back and refine. Right. Okay. So I'm going to ask everybody who would be supportive of the 65 foot limit revision. So I'm going to raise my hand. Who's anyone behind me? All right. So there's 4 of us.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other option, and tell me if I'm missing an option, but the other option would be to leave it as is.
Mhm.
So anybody who's in favor of that? Okay, so 3.
Okay, well,
Nicely.
that is a majority.
It is.
For
I feel like I've
support
been the
staff
tiebreaker.
proposal. So I
I
think
don't
what
know
we've
if
done in the past with that is we've brought you back an option that implements that majority, but we're still in an open record period and we're still going to hear about things. So,
is there any other options that commissioners are interested in having staff kind of, I mean, you said
that's a
something,
good question.
Commissioner Beeson said, well, what if we looked at 75? Or,
75,
I mean, what does that
80
look
or
like? What does that
90.
mean? What does that?
Commissioner Fragler.
Commissioner Fragola, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think you should move. I move that we move the chair seat to where she can see the screen. Do I have a second on that? Okay, so I'm just joking.
I'll just keep turning my head.
Yeah. I know this kind of opens the door to something else, but I am wondering about, could we build in incentives to the code where if we would allow additional height if we incentivized commercial commercial development on the ground floor, because we did hear from the community, from stakeholders, that they're concerned that they want to see more commercial development for neighborhood use, and they're concerned that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we talked about not wanting to prescribe it, but maybe we could incentivize it. And so I'm asking staff if that
idea.
Yeah.
Is
I mean,
that
I think we could write a piece of code that would say if the building proposal includes X foot high ground floor commercial space, then you get an additional X number of feet. I think we could write that if we had direction from you to do that.
2 floors, 24 more feet, but go to 90. You go from 65 to, I'm not being facetious. I think if you look at it, you could do something like that. Certainly at least 1 floor, following up what Commissioner Fragola said.
I think, in my mind, it would be an additional floor to allow a developer to expand the height of the building. We would be staying more within the initial kind of projection of that 65 to 75 feet for walkable, bikeable, pedestrian-friendly communities. That seems to be a standard within the development community. So we could provide an incentive for, I don't know how many additional feet you need to get another floor, but an incentive for that to incentivize commercial at the ground level.
I would just say the original special area zone had a 10-foot bonus for affordable housing. And you mentioned the 5-foot increase for commercial ground floor height. And I believe it also granted an additional 10 feet for that. So it'd be a
because you're not, most of the time commercial has higher ceilings, correct?
Yes.
So I would be supportive of an additional 10 feet to incentivize commercial at the ground level.
Okay, Commissioner Lear.
Oh, I was just going to note, I think that's a really brilliant idea as well. I'd also support the idea of getting more additional building space than just what's taken up by the commercial, with the idea of being in a housing shortage, that took decades of very well-meaning decisions about preserving the community. And then all of a sudden we kind of realize, well, oh my gosh, housing prices have doubled in 3 years. And we're the most housing burdened community basically in the entire country. And just with the idea that Commissioner Beeson brought of that actually creating the ability to then build even a little bit more housing than you might have been able to in the original, as opposed to just kind of swapping it out for commercial. So I think that's a really good compromise idea as well.
Okay. Commissioner Beeson.
I like Commissioner Fragala's idea. I think staff should bring something back along the lines that we're talking about. I would just ask that there's some care involved, and I'm getting into area that I'm not an expert in, and Commissioner Ramey can help me with this. But I think going back to the study that was done in 2019 or 17 that the city had that was part of the corridor, I forget the name of the company. If you look at that, there's kind of some conventions, I'm going to dare to say, where the ground floor on a mixed use with commercial and then housing above, the ground floors can be 15 and sometimes they're 18. Mm-hmm. Say they're 15, the additional floors, I believe, are typically 12. I'm not sure adding an additional 10 feet really buys you kind of livable space. So I would do it in 12-foot increments. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of my suggestion. If you went from 65 and added 2 floors, that would get you up into the 90-foot range. So if you add 1 floor, consistent with what Commissioner Fragala was asking for, that would be whatever 12 and 65 is. So it'd get you up to about 80. I just would ask that I know you guys will do this, but that we just look at it pretty carefully.
Yeah.
Yes. So that would,
if there's a poll that the majority of the commission wants to look into this incentive,
we can do a poll.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify. So we're talking about enough height so that you can accommodate a commercial or retail floor, because that's going to be taller at the ground level. So whatever that difference is, plus then allow for an additional floor at the top around, 12 feet or whatever that,
I heard or 2.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify that my suggestion was just an incentive for a commercial floor on the ground floor, not for an additional floor above the 65.
Oh.
Well, so I guess I'm not seeing where the incentive is then.
It's on, so.
But what are they getting in just, they get to build commercial?
They get to go.
No, they get the additional, it's 65 plus whatever the ground floor is.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding what was just said, but what I thought I heard was that you said the additional ground floor as an incentive plus 65 plus another level on top of that.
Right. So I guess I'm going to clarify what I'm hearing is that if you're going to incentivize somebody to build commercial, which they need an extra 5 feet, you're going to need to incentivize them by giving them an extra floor of housing at the top. So that becomes,
I see what you're saying.
12 and 12 or whatever. So you were talking an additional 24. I'm ballparking here,
right?
I think.
And what we might want to do is go back to our consultants who wrote the memo and ask them what they would do to incentivize that commercial.
Okay, so I have Commissioner Bailing had her hand up, and then Commissioner Ramey.
So I'm assuming we will be discussing this further. We'll be doing more deliberations. My request is when you come back, if there could be a large zoning map of the area for us to see, and actually information about how many potential C2 lots we're talking about that would be impacted, because I see very, very, very few. The entire Lower River Road area below River Avenue, it looks like there aren't any till you get down to Chambers. And above the belt line is a cluster, and then further north in Santa Clara, there's very little.
Yep. We can include a zoning map for sure.
I will say that there are 179 properties that are zoned C2 in the River Road area, and maybe at a larger scale, it'll be more apparent.
That would be helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So maybe we could straw poll. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Ramey, go ahead.
Okay. The 65 feet is a mixed use that includes commercial on the ground floor, I'm pretty sure. So that 65 number already assumes that you're doing commercial on the ground floor. The idea of incentivizing is terrific, but we're not the right people to understand what if we give an extra floor of housing, that's actually going to be an incentive. I don't know that that is an incentive to anyone to
Okay.
So we may have to come up with a different incentive strategy, which unfortunately is probably beyond our control as a commission and gets into things like tax credits and other kinds of benefits to people who provide commercial. I'm not sure that the built form, I'm not sure there's a way you can incentivize it. And we don't, unless there's something that we don't know, adding a floor to a residential, there's absolutely no evidence that that is an incentive at this point anyway.
Okay.
Something we want, but it's maybe not a financial incentive to a developer. So I'm just not sure, as much as I like incentives, I'm not sure that's going to get us there. My idea, I actually would say, you know, you can have a 60-foot high building, or if you have a commercial building, you have a 65-foot high building. That would be the way I'd look at it, which is not an incentive, but just is a reflection of, well, yeah, we're going to do commercial on the ground floor.
Not sure how to respond to that. I'm not sure what to pull at this point, because I would be, we have a hand. Is that what you're telling me? Okay. I'll call on whoever it is. I guess I'm trying to figure out where to gauge where the group is trying to go with this. It sounds like there's enough support for the 65-foot, but I also do like the idea if there was an incentive that could be built in to allow for an additional 10 feet. I mean, if there's an incentive
there is
for affordable housing
Yes,
to build
exactly.
10 feet, then why wouldn't a market rate housing developer not want the 10 feet? I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to call on whoever's behind me. Commissioner Isaacson.
A quiet one.
It's like a surprise.
A couple of things. One, and I realize that this is at the 99.9 yard line, and asking this question is probably not germane to making this work here, but maybe for future issues. None of us are developers. None of us are a part of the projects we're talking about. And it would be really good if we're talking about what things could move the needle for developers to have a developer as part of the communication to say, this is what would move the needle for me if you're talking about this, so that we can decide whether or not that fits with what we want. I mean, it seems kind of counterproductive otherwise. And the next thing is kind of a bleed over into, I know, our next topic, but it's now spilled over to this one, which is we don't have a site-specific zoning, or excuse me, site-specific zoning map. And so when we come back, it would be great if we could have individual parcels that we know what is zoned for what, so that not only we have this, but in the final plan, whatever we adopt, whoever owns a specific parcel is able to look up their parcel and know exactly what their property is able to do, as opposed to kind of a general area.
To clarify, Commissioner Isaacson, we don't have a parcel specific diagram, but we do have parcel specific zoning maps. So a property owner can look up their property and know exactly what their property is zoned. The questions sometimes come in on the edges of the plan diagram in the metro plan.
Okay. Okay. So, what I'm hearing, and I'm happy to re-poll if there is a interest by the commissioners for staff to consider, with existing incentives that we already have that are, whether it's for affordable housing to be able to add 10 feet, and that it sounds like that's 10 feet to the existing 120 feet. If that's today. Is that what that incentive represents, or no?
State law is actually additional feet, and it is tied to how many feet are allowed in the zone.
Okay.
And so it's complicated, but
so today,
change it if we,
So today, if somebody were to say, I want to build on this parcel right here, they could do 120 feet plus the 10 if they're building.
Well, it's not 10, it's more.
We can get back to you with
specifics
about the affordable housing requirements in state law.
Okay.
Yeah. So can I just
please do.
I feel like what I heard, and again, I think this is where you were going, Commissioner Edwards, is there was a fair amount of support for the staff recommended 65-foot height limit. I also heard a fair amount of interest on the commission about the idea of an incentive for ground floor commercial with housing above, and a recognition that, you know, maybe the commission tonight isn't in a position to dictate exactly what that looks like. But perhaps, and I'll look at Terry to see if this is possible, but, you know, perhaps this is again something that commission could ask for community input on, if there are developers in the community that want to say, you know, what would be really helpful in that situation is this. And also for staff to do some looking in the time that you have to see if there is, you know, something that rises to the top in terms of what at least feels to staff like a workable incentive for that kind of development along in the neighborhood area.
Yeah, and I don't know if we really need a straw poll. I heard the same thing. I heard the same thing, that you would like to hear what would incentivize ground floor commercial, and to talk to some developers about that.
I think that would be great. I also think a question that I would have is, as this moves through the process and makes its way to council, if there were, for example, as a body collectively, our recommendations didn't end up with any kind of zoning changes that we could, you know, we're not the ones doing it, but we are delivering recommendations to them. Those recommendations could potentially be to explore these types of things that had not been talked about until right now. And so maybe that could be something where, you know, as we ended up kind of undecided or on the fence. And so as we, you know, pass on a recommendation to council, it would be to ask the community to weigh in more heavily on these kind of specific incentives or whatnot. In theory, right? Could do that. Okay. We're not there, but we have a hand. Commissioner Isaacson.
You poked the bear. Now I'm going to talk all the time. But this is more of a statement for the general public than us. I mean, we get a lot of conversation about whether or not we're in public engaging them, and this is the opportunity to do so. So this is the call that if you have folks who are in the development world, this is the time to weigh in on what moves the needle. I would hate to get pass this on to city council and then tune in for their public hearing and have a call go out and say, we had no idea this is going on. This is democracy in action. So if you feel that you have some input, then input.
Okay.
Move us to our last item.
Thank you, Commissioner Isaacson. Okay, we're sure we've got time.
We have 6 minutes. We can do it. Thank you. No, that's all really helpful discussion. I really appreciate it. And the last item, I think, might be quick. We'll see. This relates to the repeal or not to repeal the 1987 Urban Facilities Plan. So in that plan, there is a land use diagram that's shown here on the slide on the left that is not parcel specific. It also includes sub-area maps, diagrams on the right-hand slide that show a little bit more detail and then some language about what to do in those areas. And so this, in effect, refines the Metro Plan, which is at a regional scale, down to the scale of River Road and Santa Clara. So options to address concerns about repealing this document include keeping it. So this was covered in a lot of the testimony from property owners on River Avenue, because there's overlap between the issues of prohibited uses and the diagram. So staff talked about this. We talked about the pros and cons of going forward the way we had originally proposed, which was the first option on the slide, adopt the 2023, really it's going to be 2024 neighborhood plan, and repeal the 87 plan, or keep both plans in place. And the way that that could work is that both plans serve different purposes. We have a neighborhood plan that originally was going to include a special area zone, and it morphed over time. What it is now is a set of vision statements, goals, and policies, and they do not trigger review during the land use application process. The existing plan, in contrast, does function that way, and both things can be true. So that's the conclusion that we came to as a small staff team, was that that's a viable option. We could do that. We could keep both plans in place. We will have another decision to make in 2026 when we have the citywide parcel specific diagram. Okay. We will need to decide what to do with all of the refinement plans. Okay. And so that day will come. Mm-hmm. But for now, the staff feels, and from the testimony that we received, we feel this would be a workable option for those parties. Mm-hmm. But again, record is open. We'd like to know what people think of this option. But staff is comfortable with either the first or second bullet on the slide.
Okay. And my question about it is, well, questions. Does the parcel specific diagram solve for the problem that kind of would require us to sort of keep both? And then my other question related was, shoot, forgot it already. Maybe we'll start with that one. So would I don't know if it's a formal adoption process or what, but at the point in time when a parcel specific diagram is produced, and that does that resolve that?
I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
I think so too. I mean, I think what you've heard from in testimony is that there are folks that feel that the neighborhood plan diagram, the 1987 plan diagram, and the sub area diagrams provide a little bit more specificity than the general metro plan diagram. Right. And so until the time that a parcel specific diagram is adopted, they would prefer to keep the 1987 plan in place to take advantage of whatever extra specificity might live in that plan. It's not parcel specific either, but it is at a little bit additional different scale. Yeah. When the parcel specific diagram is adopted, then you will be able to go parcel by parcel throughout the city. Yeah. And so, but as Terry mentioned, you know, that adoption package will also require review of all of the refinement plans, many of whom have their own plan diagrams, and to, you know, figure out how everything works together, what needs to be repealed, et cetera, et cetera. So it would not be specific to the River Road Santa Clara area. It would need to happen throughout the city.
And does keeping both plans in any way seem to compromise the work that's been done for we're going to call it the 2023 plan? Does it compromise it in any way or water it down? Or
question? Yeah. No, but is my answer. And that's because there has been testimony from Jerry Finnegan and others about the kind of whole reason for updating the neighborhood plan was to replace really outdated text. That being said, the changes that have happened over the course of the work, I think bring us to a new reality. And technically, I think the technical answer is no, there's not a problem with keeping both of them.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I don't want to anybody. Okay, Commissioner Isaacson, thank you.
Yeah, I'm in favor of keeping both. I think Terry, you put it right, that's a new reality that we're kind of facing here. And I don't know if this is something we can add on to it or not, but our whole plan here is to make a recommendation to council, right? We work for them. So our job is, as I understand it, is to recommend them the best course of action based on what we have determined through testimony and through our own work. And so with it, I would imagine it would be good to say to them, this is our recommendation. If it is your direction that we come back and do something different, then you can direct us on this one specific item and we can go through the process specific to this, but leave it to them to make up their minds on what they want us to do. And that will, of course, require funding and everything else that goes along with it. But I'm on board with keeping both plans.
Okay. So I'm going to pull this unless anybody has any. Oh, Commissioner Fragola. Okay, go for it.
Yeah. So I guess I'm feeling a little confused because it seems like we've heard so much about how outdated the 1987 plan was. And I thought I just heard you say that once the parcel specific land use diagram plan is put into place in 26, which is really 2 years away, it's not that far away, then we would have to retire the 1987 plan anyway. So I'm just wondering if it makes more sense to adopt the neighborhood plan and rely on the metro plan diagram until the parcel specific plan is done. Isn't that like a more kind of like direct route to getting to the parcel specific plan if we're just going to have to go back and repeal the 1987 plan once the parcel specific diagram is available in 26?
That was our original train of thought. And so that was the original proposal. However, I don't think it's a lot of work to go back and repeal. As you say, we're going to be doing that with all of the refinement plans that exist across the city. So as we were talking about this, analyzing each of them, yes, deciding which pieces need to come forward or be overridden or what. We have not gotten there yet, and we won't until 2026, and we take that work on. But I think we were understanding that there's just not harm, I guess, being done, and that keeping both plans would address some of the concerns that have been raised. And so that's why staff is willing to support that option. But like you said, the original option is still available if Planning Commission chooses to recommend that. We think it serves the needs of the neighborhood and the property owners alike because we do have the Metro plan.
Okay, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Bailey.
So I go back to this last batch of testimony, which included a letter from the co-chairs of the River Road neighborhood requesting keeping the 1987 plan.
Correct.
And these are the people who did all the work. These are the people who spent the years and hours, and I believe their thinking is valid. And if we can keep both plans in place with no detriment, then I'm in favor of that.
Yeah. I'm going to pull that option, and if we don't have a majority, we can look at the second option, with utilizing the Metro plan as our sort of backup. I'm going to ask the commissioners who are in favor of keeping both plans to signal with hand raising.
Unanimous.
It's unanimous. There we go. Great. Okay. And we're a little over time, so I want to be mindful of that.
And my computer is about to die.
Well, and it's definitely perfect timing. I want to kick it back just to see if there are any other items from commissioners or staff. You all have anything?
The other thing I was going to mention is that we will be back here on December 5th. We intend to cancel the meeting on the 28th. We don't have a topic for that, and we're going to need more than we need a little bit of time. Okay. That's when the record closes. So your next meeting will be December 5th. You also have one on December 12th, and we'll be sending you the meetings for the 2024. But it's, as you know, typically the second and fourth Tuesdays. Okay. And then, as Terry mentioned, the climate-friendly parking code amendments were approved by council last night, as was the Cintas Metro Plan amendment.
All right.
I'll leave it at that for the sake of time.
Good work, everybody. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.